Hi, and welcome to another edition of Seniors Today. I'm your host, Tom Bardee, and our guest today is Mr. Lou Brero, who is a world-renowned race car driver and motorcycle driver, and also a very humble man as well. So welcome, Lou.
Thank you, Tom.
Good to have you on the show today.
It's wonderful to be here. This is very exciting to me.
Oh, cool. You know, I've probably known you maybe less than 15 years, maybe closer to 10. And from the first day I met you, I was just fascinated by some of the stories that you have to share about things you've done in your life and your career growing up, and some of your exploits driving cars and traveling the world. And so I feel really fortunate to be able to have you on the show today, and also that you're a friend, and also that you live in Vallejo. And you're probably one of Vallejo's best kept secrets. So again, I'm glad you're able to be with us here today.
Thank you. Maybe it's a good idea that I'm a kept secret.
Well, who knows about that? But maybe you could just give us a little bit of information about your family and some of your background.
Well, I think I should start in Monterrey on the Russian River. I was born in '36, and by 1939, I began to have a great interest in things mechanical. I was still a toddler, but my father had made a penny farthing bicycle for me by taking a tricycle apart and putting a single wheel in the rear, and pushed me around until I finally learned how to ride it. Well, at about 3.5 years of age, I made my own. I took the wheel of one of the trike wheels and put it into the rear of the bicycle with a stick and rode off of the end of the Monterrey Bridge. And that was before the time of OSHA and so forth, and it was about this high from here to the ground, and I knocked myself out. I still have a little piece of dirt in my head, and I've been knocking myself out with mechanical things ever since. In 1949, I was sent to Europe. I was 14 years old. I was sent to Europe on a ship. It was quite a marvelous adventure in San Francisco. The ship was an Italian passenger freighter, wonderful food, stopped in many strange countries, and we went down through South America, stopped in Guatemala, San Salvador, El Salvador, went through the Panama Canal. On the other end of the Panama Canal, I separated from my grandparents who had made this trip possible, and I went into a dark alley where there were some gentlemen in sheets, Arab gentlemen, I think, and they were waving me in there and speaking in a strange way, and I didn't understand what they wanted, and then suddenly I was surrounded by them, and I realized something was very wrong. And my grandfather, who was a giant of a man, his shadow closed off the light to the alley, and this Arab gentleman disappeared. My grandfather said, "Don't you ever do that again." So we went on this wonderful sea trip and stopped in Africa, and I believe the Canary Islands. And when we got to Spain, we visited there, then I got off the ship in Marseille, where we got on a train called Le Train Bleu, the Blue Train. And it was a very primitive choo-choo train with cinders coming in the windows and maroon velvet drapes with golden fringe, and it rocked back and forth, and the tracks were just out of the sea. It was marvelous. And so presently we ended up in Cannes, France. And there were these 3 gorgeous girls who I'd never met that were part of my family, remote cousins. And they rushed up to me, and I had this big furry curly hair, and they drew my face to their breasts and would fondle my hair. And that began a sort of an interesting education that young woods rats from Humboldt County seldom learn. And so their business was They made summer dresses, hand-sewn summer dresses, very beautiful and very exotic. And no lady in any other, and they weren't wealthy, and no lady in any country ever saw another lady in a similar dress. And so one day, Nina, my aunt, had me start the 1921 Fiat. She had some patterns to deliver to the seamstress. And so she said, head towards Monaco. And so, well, en route to Monaco, presently, she said, turn left here. We went through a beautiful Japanese garden, ponds and streams and little bridges, and it's very beautiful. And before us was this magnificent villa, and it was like a small palace. And the name of the villa was La Californie. And so we went into the left-hand entrance to the villa. It was wrought iron and colored glass, lead inlaid glass. And we were in a very long, narrow hallway, very tall, pure white, arched in a Moorish style. The only objects in that room were a Singer treadle sewing machine, a chair, and a small table. Nina put the pattern on the table, and walking towards us, as though on air, was this beautiful lady, blue black hair, violet eyes, very dark, very elegant. And Nina was beautiful too. And these two beautiful ladies are chattering over the pattern. And of course, everything that was said was in French. And I picked up the language very quickly. I have a very good ear for sound, and that helped me in my motor racing too. And so presently, Nina said, I would like to introduce my nephew to Il Maestro. And so the lady knocked on a door, and out came a very small man, dressed exactly as I was, in French army shorts with pockets and rope-soled sandals. And he had a ring of gray hair around his head, and a very high domed head, very tan, and bulging brown eyes. He was a small man. And they, three of them started to chat, and I went into the room that he'd come out of, and there were multiple paintings and sculptures, and they were horrible. They were the ugliest things I'd ever seen in my life. They made no sense. Pretty soon I sensed his presence behind me, and he said, Jeune homme, vous n'aimez pas mes peintures? Young man, you don't like my paintings. And pretty tactfully, for a little woods rat from Humboldt County, I said, well, I don't understand them. And he laughed and said, don't feel bad, I don't like a lot of this stuff either, but little old ladies, wealthy little old ladies, give me a lot of money for it sometime. He said, you seem to like the 3 miniatures down on the floor. There's a lot of color there. You should take one. It's going to be very valuable someday. I'm not going to live forever. And I said to myself, how am I going to get out of this? And I said to him, oh, I wouldn't be able to take good care of it, sir. And he laughed. Well, a couple months later, I was on my 1933 BSA motorcycle called the Blue Star. And I was down on the beach, not far from the place where they have the Hollywood events now. And I was on the beach with my blanket, and he showed up on the beach. Came over and sat with me, and we did what 70-year-old men and 14-year-old boys do the world over. We were chatting about the beautiful naked and half-naked girls on the beach. And the European tourists would come by, politely cover their mouths and say, Pablo Picasso, Pablo Picasso. And that's who he was, and he was very nice to me.
Wow, very cool.
Yeah.
So your grandfather knew him?
No, my grandfather did not know him. It was just my Aunt Nina. My grandfather used to be the garage man at the Carlton Hotel in the 20s. And a garage man in those days did not wear dirty overalls. He wore spats and beautiful vest and diamond stick pins and beautiful smoking jewelry and so forth. And he would speak to the chauffeurs, and he told me about ladies who would come in there, and wealthy princes and potentates from all over the world, with some with automobiles with jewel inlaid door handles, Rolls Royces, Bugattis, Hispano suites, everything you could think of.
Wow.
And
Wow.
so I was a little disappointed because I had been told that Harpo Marx and Groucho had been with my Aunt Nina at the villa just before I arrived there. And so that began a very interesting life for me from Humboldt County, where really nothing much happened except we drank a lot of beer and ran wild through the forest. So that began a new life. And that Cannes in that time, the Riviera in France, this was just after the war. And it was quite beautiful. There weren't a lot of alien people there. It was very much still French. The waters were crystal clear. You could see the fish under the water, luminescence at night. It was just marvelous. And there were incredible personalities. King Farouk, who was exiled from Egypt, his father was a big, powerful man, a very strong man. King Farouk was a sort of a spoiled child, and he grew up rather a degenerate type of man, very hairy, very large, and he wore a woolen bathing suit, and he had this black cap that was stuck on the top of his head and sunglasses that made his head even look larger because they were so close together. And he would look at us young boys on the beach and he'd go like this. He'd raise his eyebrows like that and go like this. And no. And there was you'd see Rita Hayworth and Ali Khan drive by, incredible personalities and automobiles of stunning beauty. After the war, a lot of these wonderful cars came out of hiding. Talbot Lagos, Delages, Delahayes, Bugattis, Hispano suites. Some of the Delages and Delahayes had great chromium or nickel fenders and voluptuous, beautiful things. And along with that, this is 1950 coming up, were the little Renault 4CVs that looked like a little 40 Ford, cute little cars, and Vespa and Lambretta motor scooters, and stunningly beautiful girls. Speaking of which, my Aunt Nina and her beautiful daughters, who taught me on a lot of interesting things.
We can't go into that.
We can't go into that now. Had this wonderful place where they displayed their wares in a tiny town. It was a very Coney Island-like place, except 300 years old, called Juan Le Pen. And they had a little dress shop, a tiny dress shop, just across from the casino. And I would be in there in my little tiny bikini, and into that place would come the most beautiful actresses and models in the world. And they would walk to the back where they would be fitted for bikinis and summer dresses that the girls would hand sew for them. And they would be naked by the time they got to the other end of the store, and I was out of my mind all the time.
So is that why you reverted to motorcycle racing?
Well, motorcycle racing came later. Actually, cars came first. There's a photo in my album, too bad we can't see it here, of me and my family in Cannes standing in front of a 1930s Alfa Romeo, one of two made. It was in the Paris show. I was 14 years old, and I made the head gaskets for that car, and they were still running 10 years later. And so I had already been very into mechanical things. And so when we came back to America at the end of that year, in Humboldt County, I opened the first exclusive sports car shop in the northwestern hemisphere of planet Earth. And it was 4950, and I was 14 years old.
Wow. And where was that located?
In Arcata, California.
In Arcata.
I liken it to the backside of humanity. Anyway, I was there for many, many years, tough years. But for the first few years, my dad wanted to go motor racing, and he wanted to do it partly for me because I had a natural affinity for automobiles and mechanical things. And he wanted to get me away from the life of logging trucks and forklifts and tractors and kind of a rural, rough life, because he wanted me to see something better of life. And so we went into sports car racing. We raced at Pebble Beach, Golden Gate Park, Santa Barbara, Nassau in the Bahamas, Hawaii. And I think it would have to be at another interview with you where we would speak about the motor racing so much. But I will tell you about some of the people I met. At Santa Barbara, my father managed to sneak me into the car in the race. And Zsa Zsa Gabor sat on the front of the car and smiled at me, and I was very impressed by her appearance. And there were people like Cary Grant, Lance Reventlow, son of Barbara Hutton, the wealthiest woman in the world, heiress to the Woolworth fortune. His father was Count Reventlow. Again, there was Cary Grant, Lee Marvin, and all kinds of people around. And I was kind of the little darling of the sports car group because I was so young, you know, and was racing and did quite well. And
what was the first race you did?
that was Santa Barbara, my first official race, where my father allowed me to put his helmet on and sneak into the car and take off in the race, in which I either won or got second. In that race were Bill Strop with the factory Curtis's and the factory Triumphs, and quite a lot of fast people from Southern California.
What was the car you were driving?
I was driving a Jaguar XK120, and I still have that car. That was 1952 or 3. And I still have that car, and I have no funds, but I'm trying to finish it out so that I can race it again. It was the first car my dad raced and the first car I raced.
So when did your dad start racing?
In America, in modern times, 1952 or 3.
So he started just slightly before you did.
At the same time.
Wow.
And my dad was the fastest, absolute fastest of all the American drivers. My dad was on a par with Sterling Moss. They had tremendous duels at Nassau in the Bahamas with my father in a lesser car. In fact, in every race, he was in a lesser car. Carroll Shelby had sponsors for Ferraris and Maseratis. Phil Hill had the best of the best. They were wealthy on their own and had extremely wealthy sponsors. And my father had his 14-year-old son, me. I was a mechanic on the cars.
Wow.
And I came up with a lot of ideas and inventions, and Dad would listen to my proposals, and most of the time he would accept them and say, yes, do that. So I would do things to the car like move the engine back and make little parts and so forth. And Dad would throw in his 2 cents worth, and we ended up with quite a bit of a success. My father won the first 6-hour race in the United States at Torrey Pines, driving alone in a C-type Jaguar, which I had prepared. And my young friend and I set the record of changing 4 tires at a pit stop that Ferrari team had set at Le Mans just before that, and we broke their record by about 2 seconds, changing 4 tires in the room. And that helped my dad win a 6-hour race.
Who was your friend? Who was your friend?
His name was Jacques Baudouin. He was sponsored, his family was sponsored to America by my father. And he became, he was very studious, and he became head of the Stanford lab, the chemical lab, I believe. And a wonderful friend. And so we had some marvelous cars. We had the X-Phil Hill Mexico Ferrari, which was a stunning car, one of a kind. And I had that for 44 years of poverty and often suffering. You see, when my father was killed in 1957, I was a rather famous kid in a wretched little town without pity. And I went through some very hard times there. There was a lot of abuse from envious people. And of course, it didn't help that I was an absolute wild man and did anything I want, as long as it wasn't harmful to anything or anyone. Such things as riding on the rear wheel through town whenever I felt like it, driving very, very fast, and giving certain gestures with my hands to people who tried to make me be like them.
Wow. But, so I know that I'm going to want to have you back for other shows, so I know we're getting